So I'm here with my friend Joe Atalig from the United States. He lives in Arizona, and Joe and I go, I always want to say way back because it feels like I've known you forever, Joe. And I'm so glad to have you here today just to have a heart to heart conversation. So let's talk about what you're doing recently called the Unconditional Life. What
Well, thank
steps does that mean to you, first of all? Tell us
well,
give us
thank
some
you.
insight to that.
Awesome. Well, before that, I just want to say thank you for inviting me to this conversation on your YouTube channel. Yeah, it does seem like we've known each other then like over a year now, but the connection that we first experienced with each other was absolutely palpable and just so real. And it's so cool to see how, people show up in our lives, right, at the right timing for the right purposes, in order to expand our own growth and our own pathway to evolving. So I appreciate you more than you know. You've taught me so much. We've had some amazing conversations. And it's one of those relationships where we may not talk for a little bit, but as soon as we reconnect, it's like there was no time in between. So anyway, I just wanted to acknowledge you and thank you for having me on. And I think that actually is probably a good jumping off point of what an unconditional life is. And I was really curious about the word unconditional. And so I went and searched, for synonyms and definitions because we many times associate the word unconditional with unconditional love, right? And I said, I wonder what an unconditional life would look like. And so the words that popped up from that search were um, unrestricted, uninhibited, like wholehearted, complete, limitless. And so I'm like, wow, what would a life be if we could have unlimited and unrestricted love, wholehearted acceptance of who we are and who others are, right? This complete way of accepting, radical acceptance of people, situations, those things that we call our shadow, those things that we may not be proud of, and those decisions that we made in the past that we had a lot of shame about. What would happen if, right, it was just unlimited and just this unrestricted acceptance of it all? That it is a part of who we are, but it doesn't define who we are. It help, so I thought that was a good aspirational thing to present to the world. And an unconditional life isn't a perfect one by all means, at least in what a lot of people may think. An unconditional life is linear, right? And I think you and I, of course, know, and many of those that are watching know, that life is far from linear. It isn't from point A to point B. And I think that's the beauty of accepting what an unconditional life can be. And so it does align, with the cause that you and I initially met on, which was the love wave. And the love wave, as you remember, was intended to teach and to impart and to demonstrate the undeniable possibilities in life when we look through the lens of love. And so when I combine those two together, it creates a beautiful platform for me to have conversations with diverse individuals who I call either thought leaders, or they've made changes in their life, or changes in their communities, so like change makers. And then also I'm making space for what I call divine nobodies. People who are more interested in the significance in their life versus the prominence of it. And so, they understand that fine line, but they stick to their own lane and they show this abundance of just a prosperous life because they either keep it simple or they understand that love is their guide in life. So I want to foster that in an unconditional life community, which I'm just starting right now. And I think it's a cool jumping off point. I'm really excited to see how that all unfolds. That was a long ass answer, wasn't it?
Yes, and you said so many things. I was like, hold on, okay, I want to talk about this, and I want to talk
Mm,
about this, and I want to talk
mm,
about this. So let's go right back to the beginning because first of all, I want to say to anybody that's listening to this, could you guys feel like the goosebumps? My whole body was like lit up with life. Joe, you speak so much life when you talk about stuff, but the very beginning, and you're researching unconditional, what that means, the unrestricted and the uninhibited, and this limitless kind of life and love. And one of the things that stood out for me the most when you went into that was the piece on shame, because shame has been an interesting topic even for me in my own life, but with my clients as well. And I think shame, even if you look on the lowest end of the spectrum, if we're measuring like the vibration of emotion, shame is at the very bottom. It's like the closest to death. And I know it's one of the hardest things to meet with this exceptional, limitless, unrestricted love and compassion. So can you speak to that maybe just a little bit, and maybe a personal testimony even in your own life? You don't have to go into great detail, but has there been a time where you came to this place where you totally just radically forgave yourself and released shame from something from your life?
Yeah, absolutely. Ooh, there's many of those instances, but as you are framing that question, um, and as you know, I'm a very deep feeling man, so um, and I think that is probably a good thing to actually talk about, is this idea that men or boys or males, right, don't feel. So I had a lot of shame about that, even as a young kid. I had this ability, I guess you could say, to feel what others were feeling. Energetically, I'd pick up on happiness and joy, and I instantaneously would just like, ooh, be attracted there. But I also could feel when someone was hurt, and I felt it like I was hurted. And I never understood it, and I thought I was weird, and I was always told, you're too sensitive. It's like, don't cry. It's like, come on, be strong, and all those things that are embedded because, that's just how the world is, and how most men are brought up to be, And so I think, and it's just recently where I always knew that, not that I was different, but I'm recognizing that even in all the personality assessments and all of the, um, and trying to really discover who I am, like taking strength assessments and, everything from Myers-Briggs to all these, and they may be secular, quote unquote, but they really do tell an amazing story. And what I found was, like with Myers-Briggs, I'm known as an INFJ. And when I read the description, it says, this is the rarest of the 16 personality types. And it's about 1% of the population. So I thought, that explains it. So in a room of 100 people, there's like one of me. So the way that I look out of it is going to be different. So when I speak and I talk and I give a particular perspective on things, it may not be met with embracing and or understanding. And so the shame around who I was, I've lived with. So what did I do? I created a false self so that I could fit in, so that in those times I could, really deliver what people wanted, so that I could be liked, so that I could be accepted. And so in the shame of that as well, right, creating this false identity per se and wearing a mask, throughout my life, there is that idea of what would my life be if, but I've also decided I can't do the coulda, woulda, shouldas, right? That doesn't lead me anywhere. But I made a decision when, after my divorce and after, I had a kidney transplant and, a lot of health issues, that I wanted to make a decision that I needed to continue this path of discovering, or maybe rediscovering and returning back to my original self. That is where I found who I was, which is, this idea of love, with power, love that it is sentimental, but more of the love that sees past what's in front of us with the naked eye, you know, the circumstance and all those types of things. And I always wondered why I always loved the underdog. It's like there's two teams playing, and I'm like, well, who's favored? And they're like, this team. I'm like, oh, I'm rooting for that team. And then the other, that's just like, and it was just, I don't know. It was just, and I started to think, start to love that, you know? And I always thought, Amy, that I always had to explain myself. So many times in conversations, I'll give a lot of context where people are like, can you cut to the chase already? It's because I've always had to explain my thought process so people could understand and potentially receive it and embrace it. But now that shame no longer resides in that space, and I can fully express who I am because I've chosen that. Yeah, I've seen that less and less, you know, in terms of me having to provide this story and an explanation rather than just showing up wholeheartedly and speaking exactly from my heart and what I'm thinking. So, you know, in terms of an example of how shame is mitigated or at least looked at and examined, I knew that there was a difference between shame and guilt. And you and I both know that that fine line is guilt is I'm sorry for what I did, and shame is I'm sorry for who I am. And if you're living in that space, you know, you would do anything, you know, even if it's false, right? To not even look at who you really are. So I hope that answers your question, but
Yeah, and you
it's,
unpacked a lot there.
yeah,
And something that was coming up for me as you were leading into just the last few lines was that shame really is this story that we carry around with us in order to justify our existence.
yeah,
And I've had that. I've been in those situations where I've been caught in and don't even realize it until I'm exhausted, where
yeah,
I'm in the shame story of justifying and explaining in such a way that I know I'm in my headspace, like I'm not even feeling in my body and in my heart.
right,
And what most of us don't realize, and I speak for me personally too, because even after doing 12 years of inner work, this still happens. It's more profound because I'm so much more aware and conscious of it. And I think the more aware and conscious that we get, the more the ability we have to actually witness something and then go, hey, wow, okay, this is what this feels like, so that we can actually embody it. And getting in that space where we feel like we have to explain ourselves in order to justify what brought us to this moment. And it
right,
can be something as simple as, for example, let's say you didn't want to do this talk with me today.
hmm,
It could be as simple as saying, Amy, I need to reschedule with you, period.
right, yeah,
But we have a tendency of going into the story of needing to explain and justifying why,
right,
and
totally,
really actually don't.
right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It would be like, hey, Amy, I woke up this morning and da, 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 da. Then I got this phone call. It just took me all the way. And it's like, I
Yeah.
just need to reschedule, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I'm really just
it's
starting to
cool.
notice for me too, because I'm a talker,
Yeah.
why I'm a talker. Like
Hmm.
where did that even come from? And am I talking to justify myself, or am I literally speaking from my heart and being in flow? So I'm
Right.
really starting to discern the difference between the two. One,
Yeah.
I always end up tired. The
Hmm.
second one, I feel liberated. So
Hmm.
that's something for viewers, I think, to hear and listen and learn, even comment below if you know the difference
Right.
between when you're speaking from a place of justification or speaking from your heart. So
Right.
that's really great. Um, I forget everything else that you said right now about unconditional life, but something that's popping into my head right now is, um, since I heard you that you're starting this live broadcast, right?
Uh-huh.
Unconditional Life, this
Yeah.
platform. And
Hmm.
we can put that down below too, but where can people go to view this, Joe?
Yeah. So it's a live stream show that is on a few platforms, Spirituality Gone Wild, which you've been a guest on,
Yes, I have.
right? And so on Facebook, going to their page, or An Unconditional Life with Joe Atalig,
Okay.
that page as well, or Love Wave Live. And then all of them are replayed on a YouTube channel, The Love Wave.
Okay.
So
So we'll
yeah,
make sure to put all those links in the down
yeah.
below as well.
8 a.m. Pacific time on Saturdays.
Okay. So
Yeah, cool.
2 more days, and it's your second one, right?
Yes,
Okay, that's
second one.
exciting. So I thought about this, and because I know for myself and a lot of other people, we have a pinching off place or point when it comes to pleasure. And we also have been conditioned to struggle so much that it's almost like too much pleasure, and we're like, nope, let's go back to struggling. So
Mm.
when I heard Unconditional Life, I was actually shopping and I was like, what about unconditional pleasure? What would that
Mm.
be like?
Ooh.
And I had an experience. It's very simple. And then I realized what unconditional pleasure was, though, from having this experience and why I gravitate and live for these moments. So I was in a grocery store here,
Mm-hmm.
and I had my list of things to get. And at the very end, I wanted some almond milk coffee cream, and they were out of it, and I was going to pay. And I looked back over my shoulder and said out loud, oh yeah, you guys just didn't have one thing I needed. And then I looked up and it was there. I didn't look high enough. So I
Mm-hmm.
grabbed that, come back. He's ringing all my stuff through. I'm about to pay, and over to my left, I see these gluten-free hamburger buns. That was also on my list, but I didn't say anything. And I asked, are these any good? Because I tend to eat gluten-free for personal reasons. And the lady kind of did an eye roll and said, they're all right. And I laughed out loud, and I'm like, well, I don't buy into that. And so she opened up and said, well, they're not that great. Like, there's nothing in them. That led the guy sharing with me, well, there's fresh bread that just got dropped off right behind you. And I turned around and I got this whiff of that homemade fresh bread smell.
Mm.
And I was like, how did I not smell that? It was very quiet. And I was so delighted and surprised. Like, I was talking like this. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I picked it up, and it was from the bakery next door. And I was like, okay, this is it. When things are made with love, I don't even care if there's gluten in it. I don't care if there's sugar in it. I don't care if there's eggs in it. I'm buying a loaf of bread. And that experience, if it hadn't unfolded exactly the way it did, would
Right.
not have given me so much delight and surprise, like that surprise factor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, I was like, that's unconditional pleasure. It's when you don't say that this is the thing that pleasures me and it has to happen in this way. It's almost like putting all your options out there to the universe, which is unlimited to begin with. It's
Right.
the source of everything, whatever you want to call it. And then being delighted and surprised over and over and over again in different ways. And this can happen on a daily basis. I remember reading during one of these episodes, I found a book and I happened to open to it. And it's a book from like the 1950s, and it was a Reader Digest collection. And the chapter I opened to was talking about subtle ecstasies. And to me, that's what these little moments where you're just so delighted by the interaction that you're having with the universe, with the people and the places and the things.
Yeah.
I was like, oh man, I'm opening myself up more to this unconditional pleasure.
I love that perspective. I mean, that, just picturing it, and it does help us to continue to live moment to moment and really understand the power of now, and the limitations that the mind may put on how our experiences are supposed to, are supposed to happen. And I love that term, actually, surprise and delight. I mean, that term brings me back into corporate America when I managed teams, and service was a big part, of course, of what we provided. And the idea of surprising and delighting people, I just love to watch their expressions and their own experience. So as you were speaking about, this aroma that you just embody, I just took it in, and the surprise and delay of how it all unfolded. What a beautiful way to live, right? So expectations are low and the anticipation is high in terms of, right? Okay, universe, yeah, surprise and delight. I'm ready.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
love that. Or even
yeah,
the expectation to be surprised and delighted, but you don't know how or when or who's going to be involved also.
right.
And then, yeah, the anticipation of not looking around every corner, but just knowing and trusting that it's going to happen. And I
Yeah,
think how easy it is because so many people make to-do lists and shopping lists and other lists. And if we just had our head down at the list and we're grumbling and grumpy that we couldn't find stuff, but I wasn't grumbling and grumpy. I was just like, oh, you don't have that one thing. And then that one thing led into this thing, which led into this thing. And it was such a pleasant, and to me,
hmm,
that's pleasure when things are pleasant
yes,
and they're satisfying. The
yes.
whole moment and interaction was so satisfying for me that it continued out throughout my whole entire day.
Mm,
Yeah.
that's fun. I love it. I love
I think
it.
that's why I paint too. Pretty sure.
Oh.
Yeah.
Mm,
So, my website is called Making Love Loud, and I know you.
mhm.
What do you think when you hear that? Because I know I get a lot of different reactions with it.
I do. I will say that when I first saw it and read it, I thought of probably what everyone else thinks of. Um, but then I thought about, ooh, the magnification of love, right? Like making it like reverberate, so the vibration of that love, right, not only is heard with the natural ear, but also the inner ear, and so it transcends third dimensional living and what we see, and it continues to press through to those parts that are unseen, and those things we may not even experience but others can, and it is through, for me, it is being truly aligned with who we are and allowing that, to be presented to the world. And I think that is the beauty of an unconditional life as well, is that it begins when we are fully like congruent to our true self, right? And not in just words, but also in our deeds and then how we demonstrate it. And just this embracing, once again, and totally around loving ourselves. And so I think about that idea of self-love, and honestly I struggled with that for a little while. I thought, oh, this is trendy. you know Self-care, self-love sounds good, and I touted it as well, but I was struggling with it, and it was just the dark parts that I struggled with, because that was still a part, right, of me and the wholeness. And so as I continued to do shadow work, and also I began to do mirror work again, there was this compassion that I had for me. And I remember sharing with you at one point, we all have core wounds that we have in our life that we either recognize, we carry, and or we, sometimes allow to lead us, unfortunately. But mine was, no one will want me, right? And so my body, my subconscious, right, would always, let that come true unless I consciously rejected it. Because basically, anything that we don't consciously reject, we subconsciously accept, right? And so the work began around this idea around self-love. And um, one of my friends actually asked a question around, well, what about self-respect? Maybe that's the conduit. And I started thinking about people that I respected, that I held in high esteem. And do I absolutely love them without condition? And the answer is, of course, yeah. So do I even respect myself? And it began to really allow me to dig a little bit deeper into those areas that I didn't hold in high esteem, right? And what was it about that judgment of myself that kept me in this lower vibration and shame and guilt? And so, as in the work, and it's kind of the model that I started to develop around an unconditional life. So, in my own evolving over these past 3 or 4 years, I told myself, Joe, take off the mask, face the truth, and then open up to love. And so, in that trifecta, that three-legged stool of sorts, right? It is identifying those personas and the reputations that I fought so hard to protect, because that's how people needed me to be, knew me to be, and wanted me to be. And then as I began to really express my true self, right, those parts that they weren't necessarily familiar with, then they were uncomfortable because it's not the Jill that they knew, but it is the Joe that I am. So it was that dance between honoring my true self and just letting that come forth, and the idea of letting go of the expectations and the approval of what others think. And those four words, the four words that would stop us in our tracks are, what will they say? At least for me, right? And so that idea of like rising above it all, like seeing yourself rise out of your body, right? And looking down and just observing, those parts of our lives that we think are there to constrain us. But in essence, they're divine and they're there to propel us. And we're given the choice. Do we constrain or do we propel? And so as I've gone back and started to thank those very things that kept me imprisoned and chained with these thoughts and ideas of who I thought I was, the chain started to fall off when I started to thank those things, right? So thanking the experience of being rejected with the first girl that I really, really liked, and she laughed at me when I told her I liked her. And I was just a little chubby dude, right? And just the experiences that I had in, unfortunately, a legalistic church where a pastor told me that I had fallen from grace. And knowing what grace was, I was like, I'm not supposed to be here. Thanking my 25-year marriage that ended in divorce, and realizing that, the other is not the enemy. It's the inner me.
Yeah.
That needs my attention the most.
Started this piece, you spoke about something that I actually want to lead into the closing of this video with, because I always think it's so important to leave viewers with something tangible that if they feel called to doing it, that they could do. And you and I actually exchanged a beautiful, spontaneous exercise that I actually wanted to speak about. And that was, would you still want me if fill in the blank? And you and I just went back and forth. And what I learned from doing that with you is every single one of us has unworthiness. And
right.
That goes back to our childhood, guaranteed, whether we're aware of it or not. And the would you want me if is just to go to show you how we carry so much judgment, opinions, and validation from other people. And if we can start to even sit with ourselves and write that list, like to the place where we don't have anything left to write.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Even if we have to come back and revisit it. And then we can start to take every single phrase that we've written and really ask ourselves, even sitting in front of a mirror. I love mirror work. It's so profound because it really is, you talked about it, it's really about us. It's really about what's happening in here, and getting to the place where you could say it out loud to yourself, would you still want me if? And meeting yourself with this conviction and love, even if the answer is no.
Yeah.
And just like, that could be an ongoing thing for people, especially for people who either don't even know where to start to do this work. Maybe people who are still finding that they're hanging on to a lot of that shame and that guilt and the doubt and just judgments of themselves, that just to do that alone in the sacred space with yourself is so profound. And then if you do have people in your life that you can sit with, and they will hold space for you, and they will not judge you like you and I did for one another.
I remember that now.
Yeah.
That was so powerful. Thank you for bringing that back to my remembrance, because I remember we just kept going, and like stuff that I even forgot about, you know. That is a powerful exercise. I wrote that down again to, I have
just proof to everybody listening, Joe and I, that was last year sometime, and we still talk. So we literally were safe spaces for each other to do that. And I mean, we said some stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know?
Yeah.
All right. If you could leave people with a message, Joe, in one or two phrases, what would it be right now?
Let's see. I would say that if living an unconditional life moves you, piques your interest, and it's something that you want to explore, start within and get really curious about your heart. I think that's it. And it all starts with the embracing and the loving of your full self. And I would say that the opportunity to become, this is, and I want to say, I don't know if this is Mother Teresa, but be the change that you want to see in the world. It's just so powerful. It's not just a quote. To me, it's instruction.
Yes.
And so let's do that. The world needs us to accept the call to fully love ourselves, because when we do that, bridges compassion for others. So that's what I would say.
Well, thank you so much. It's always an honor sharing
thank you.
with you and listening to you. I'm one of those people that could listen to you speak every single day, because you're just so heartfelt. And I personally love you for your sensitivity, because I'm also sensitive. So I understand you and I see you. So thank you for showing up today, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Thank you again. Much love.